The Sound Off Podcast. The show about podcast and broadcast. Starts now.
Where we should start.
Great.
But anything you don't on this show that if you start a sentence and you don't like how it comes out, just back it up. We'll fix it. We may or may not fix it on the video side. We will talk a little bit about why we're doing video at all, and how we can monetize that down the road. So how do you know when your podcast is ready to be monetized?
Well, when you know your podcast is ready to be monetized, it depends a lot on the type of show that you have. So I always like to start with that. If you're reaching a really specific niche audience, then you can monetize it much sooner than if you've got just a general show, right? So if you've got a show where you're talking specifically to chiropractors, then, or doctors or lawyers or, people who work in the C-suite, those can be very desirable audiences, and those can be monetized more quickly. But in general, I would say the average podcast is going to reach a more broad audience, and they need to have a decent size audience. So the question is always, what size is that? When does that make sense? And I always tell people that if you're getting to 1,000 downloads per episode and you want to monetize it yourself, that's probably when I would start looking for advertisers. If you're looking for someone else to sell ads for you, then I think that it needs to be higher, probably in the 5,000 to 10,000 per episode number. So those are kind of my guidelines.
Can we look at the guideline a little bit differently? Instead of saying you have to hit a certain number of downloads, can you do this for a certain amount of time or a certain number of episodes before making that decision to jump in? That way you know exactly what you're dealing with before you start approaching clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a really good point. It's not like, oh, I hit it once and now I'm ready to go out and do it, right? You need to have some track record, right? You need to have done this for a while. Now, the other side of the coin that I think is important for us to talk about is that the industry has changed a lot, and there are lots of different ways to monetize your podcast. Now, obviously, I'm in the advertising space, so I'm looking at it purely from an advertising perspective. But I tell you, I have had conversations recently with hosts who are making multiple thousands of dollars per month on Patreon, right? And so when's the right time to ask your audience to support you? I would say day one, right? It's the minute that somebody wants to listen to you, do they want to support you? Maybe. Why not ask, right? So, there are lots of different ways to monetize your show. It could be listener support. It could be advertisers. It could be selling your own products that you've created that, can be sold. And the other thing that when we kind of just unpack advertising, the first piece that we have to look at that I think everyone automatically goes to because it's the most common is the host read ad, which is, what I sell, what I love. But you can also get programmatic ads in your show, and programmatic ads, you could sign up for a hosting platform tomorrow and get programmatic ads. Now, are you going to retire on that? Probably not. Are you going to cover your hosting fees? Probably, right? So, you could monetize like that. And one of the, I think, missed opportunities in podcasts is I don't think we do enough affiliate partnerships. So if you're a smaller show, you can go out and you could sign up for affiliate programs tomorrow. You can start reading your own ads for companies and putting your promo code in there. And then every time you make a sale from your show, you get a kickback. And that can be a really good way to start monetizing your show at a much sooner level than having somebody else go out and sell host read ads for you.
Yeah, so for those who listen to this show, they might be familiar with it enough to know that we actually have 3 different tiers of ads that go into it. There's, the programmatic ad, which is about an $8, $9 CPM that, might be Verizon if you're listening to the States. If you're in Canada, you'll hear, it could be a Bell Mobility ad that will pop in. We also have another host, like a Red Circle, and you may hear a host read ad for something like, say, Happy Mammoth, just at random that comes through. or something like that you might hear. And the most obvious one that anybody who listens to this show would know, and this is probably the best way to make money, and that's the deals that I do with people who, like have broadcast toys. So in Canada, that would be in Enlogic, and in the States, it would be Megatrax, which provides music for podcasters. So those are 3 different tiers, but I always think that the best way and the most popular way, the way you're going to make the most money and have the best relationships, is if you wind up working one-on-one and making the deal directly with a client.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. So at True Native Media, we're a representation agency. We work with right now about 200 different podcasts. And when I'm going to a buyer, I have to say, hey, I've got these 20 shows that could be a really good fit for your product. And they have to look somewhat similar, right? Like I can't say, oh, well, this one show is getting, 10,000 downloads and it's $3,000. This show's getting 5,000 downloads and it's $3,000, right? The buyer's going to say, what the heck? Like, there should be some economy of scale here, or there should be some rhyme or reason to this pricing. And so I have to create that rhyme or reason, right? I have to go to the advertiser with a story about why this show is worth more than this show is. But when you're selling on your own, you know your unique audience, right? You know the person that is listening, and you know the value that you bring to your advertiser. Now, of course, a representation company, a good one, should also know the value of your show and can communicate that. But you can more easily find those really strong partnerships where we're stepping out of the CPM game and we're saying, hey, like you mentioned, those music companies that are specifically creating music for podcasters, those are going to be stronger because the people listening to the show are their exact target market. And so you could say, hey, it's going to be $1,000 an ad. And they'll be like, well, gosh, I only need to get 5 customers. That sounds like a win. Let's do that. Right. And that's going to be a totally different sell than when you enter into the broader ad sales arena. Then you're becoming in some ways a bit of a number, right? Because you're looking at your podcast in comparison to all of the other podcasts that one buyer is looking at, as opposed to going out and forming a one-on-one relationship with the advertiser.
So one of the things I do in this show is I pay attention to the number of people who will skip past my intro and let's go right to the guest. And so if you did do that and you missed my little talk off the top of the show about what a CPM is, that is cost per mil, that is cost per thousand. So if we talk about let's say a $25 CPM, what we really mean is that's $25 for every 1,000 impressions or downloads that is, provided out of the podcast. And that leads to the question of, well, we talk a lot about a $25 CPM, but let's talk a little bit, what's the value of the host read? So a host read, like how much extra value would you put into something that is host read?
That is a really good question. So at True Native Media, we primarily sell host read ads. So I would say like 98% of the ads that we sell are going to be a host read, which means the host has gotten the product. They have, created a specific ad for that product. And in some ways they're endorsing or recommending the product. And right now we're not necessarily seeing a premium price for host read, but it also depends on what you're comparing it to, right? So like you talked about programmatic ads. So anytime we're hearing those, Verizon ads or the progressive ads or, the pre-produced ads that are coming from massive companies, 9 times out of 10, those have been programmatically inserted, which means that the buyer, which is likely someone at a big agency in New York or Chicago, has said like, hey, I need to buy X million impressions with this demographic in mind. And they go out and they place those buys. They don't know which podcast they're advertising on. They're not individually picking those shows. They're just doing a mass purchase of literal impressions, right? They want to get in front of a certain person. And so those do tend to be a lower CPM. So those are going to fall more in, I would say, like you had commented, I would say somewhere between like 5 and 10 is generally the range. Some are a little lower, some are a little higher. depends on how much targeting they're doing specifically. With host reads, I would say that right now we're seeing those, which I feel like have come down in price in the last year, which isn't what anyone wants to hear. But I would say we're seeing those probably more in the $25 to even $15 CPM. But those also come from direct response advertisers, which are the advertisers that are looking to say, well, if I run an ad on this podcast, how many specific conversions am I getting from this ad read?
For those who are thinking about doing some advertising and they're getting into it for the first time with a future client, how long should they really be thinking about doing an ad for? I always say 13 weeks would be a good start if somebody was just a little bit trepidatious. But I know some people just want to, let's just try it for a little bit. And I say, no, you got to get a lot of frequency because this is not radio. Radio, we can litter the airwaves with ads just about every 20, 30 minutes. But because it's podcast, we want to have that frequency. We want the ad to play enough so that at least, you give yourself a chance with your audience so that people can react and convert to it. So is it 13 weeks and 6 months? Like how long should a campaign be?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think before we can answer that question, we have to have the conversation about baked in ads or dynamically inserted ads. And so just to kind of set the stage or define those terms, baked in, embedded is, sometimes people call them live reads. They're ads that are going to be in one show. So when you're publishing that audio file, your ad is in that episode and it's only in that episode, right? So if it's in episode 100, if I listen to episode 100, I'm going to hear that ad read. If I listen to episode 99 or episode 101, I'm not going to hear the ad read. That's how the industry got started. And there are still many shows that do baked in ads. And as a side note, if you're getting started with advertising, I would highly recommend that you start with baked in or embedded ads. They perform better typically for advertisers because let's face it, they're in there for a really long time, right? So that's part of the reason that they perform well, because you would have to literally go back and edit the audio file to take the ad out. Whereas dynamic ad insertion is when you use the hosting company's technology to put ad insertion points within your podcast, and then the ads are injected into your show. And how those are purchased is on a certain number of impressions and a certain number of like a certain time frame, right? So like, let's say we had an advertiser that wanted to advertise from February 1st through February 28th. How we do it, and you can set it up in different ways, but how we do it is we take a show and we mark all of their episodes with ad insertion points. And so you could listen to ad or episode number 1 or today's episode, and you're going to hear that ad, right? Because the ad is being inserted across the full catalog. The advantage of dynamic ad insertion is that you have more impressions to sell, right? Like when you are selling embedded, you have to look at the number of downloads you have on that one episode. Like that is your audience size. Whereas when you're doing dynamic ad insertion, you have the ability to sell, maybe as a listener, maybe I'm listening to 4 or 5 episodes a month of your show. Or, if you're growing really quickly, maybe you find somebody who's going to listen to your back catalog up to get current to today, right? So that number is always going to be higher than your per episode number. So there's a lot of value in that. One of the things I always like to say, because I feel like there's a lot of confusion, that when we talk about dynamic ad insertion, people automatically say, oh, well, that's an announcer read ad. But it doesn't have to be, right? And most people are not doing their ads in line with the content, meaning most people that produce, ads are recording the ad separately, they're recording the podcast separately, and then they're stitching it together and they're publishing an episode with baked in ads, yes. But it's not like all of a sudden, Matt, you and I are going to stop and talk about Shure mics right now, right? Like, that would be a true live read, which some hosts do. So it's really important, like if we're thinking about the longevity of a campaign and what's going to convert best and how long a campaign should go, identifying how the ads are going to be served to the audience is the first place to start. And I'll just take a pause there because I know that was a lot, and then we can kind of dig into maybe which channel, should be advertised on for how long.
Yeah, so I guess in that sense, if we're talking about just baked in, how long would we buy a baked in, campaign for?
Yeah, so for baked in, we have seen the best results, and I would say I've been doing this for 9 years now. I see this repeated over and over. Is a pattern of, I would say, about 6 ads. So you can run 2 ads, take 2 weeks off, run 2 more ads, take 2 weeks off, run 2 more ads. So having space between your baked in ads is important. You don't want to run them all back to back because somebody's going to listen to your episode. You want to create awareness about the product, but then you want to give enough of a break that it's not like every single time they listen to the episode, they're going to hear it. So I would say typically like a 4 to 6 ad test is very standard and can show the advertiser a lot of what they're looking to get. If you have a brand that doesn't have a lot of brand recognition, that's also something to consider. So if you're a brand new company, or if 9 out of 10 people have never heard of your product, it's going to take a much longer time to see conversions. And in a case like that, I think doing like a 12 ad test would be more appropriate because you have to establish some awareness of your product before people make a purchasing decision.
Yeah, and on the other side, if we're talking about having the ad delivered in a programmatic sense, that's easier to do, right? Mm-hmm. That's more numbers than just getting the impressions in front of people. So that's
exactly
easier said than done. And if you want to buy the short month of February, that's fine too.
Right, exactly. But no, you're right. And the reality is with dynamically inserted ads, you can create frequency much faster, right? And like to your point, when you had initially asked with baked in ads, you're just because I always crack up when people think this, just because the episode drops today and just because we think 10,000 people are going to listen to this episode, not all 10,000 people are listening to the episode the day it drops, right? It's like, this is a 30-day process. This is a 45-day process, might be a 60-day process, right? Like it takes time for podcast episodes to be listened to. And it's not event advertising where it's like everybody's listening to it today. Everybody's getting exposed today. It does take time.
And for those who are just another way for people who listen to this show to really think about dynamic audio insertion. In Canada, you're going to hear at the midway point one of my Canadian clients. And at the midway point, if you download it in the States, you'll hear another one. Mm-hmm. And that's a sort of an opportunity for me to be paid twice for the same spot. It's kind of glorious.
It is. And to your point, what's so important about it is that we have this ability to do this targeting. So as I mentioned, with programmatic ads, when those buyers are buying on essentially a demographic basis, they don't want to reach people in Canada, or they don't want to reach people in the US, right? Or they don't want to reach listeners that are maybe above a certain age. They don't want to reach people in certain different regions. I mean, you could say we only want to buy these, specific markets. And there's so much power in that for the advertiser, but also for the podcaster and for the listener, right? Because I'm sure as a Canadian, it's super fun to get ads for products that you can't buy.
Are you talking about U.S. postage stamps?
Exactly.
Or Geico insurance?
Right. Like, it's a total waste of money for people to advertise a product to someone who can't purchase it.
Yeah, and it's actually in benefit to the podcaster because that can be resold as a cheaper programmatic piece. So if the advertiser is not interested in being in Cincinnati, let Budweiser run in Cincinnati or something else.
Right. Exactly.
So aside from the pricing point, which we talked a little bit about pricing, and that was very, very helpful. But a lot of people are like, well, how do I find the brands and how do I connect to the people that I want to advertise on my show? And how do I reach out to them and how do I become their best friend?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that the best thing to do is to think about who is in your industry, right? So everybody has some sort of an industry, or everybody has some sort of a target audience, right? So if you have a pickleball podcast, or if you have, a podcast all about marketing, if you have a podcast that's about, farming, whatever the topic is, look within your industry and see who is already advertising. That is the very best way to find advertisers. Go on social media and see who's advertising on social media. A lot of those are, direct to consumer brands are terrific for podcasts. And so you really kind of just tune in to who you're seeing advertising. The other recommendation that I would have is, if you're going out and soliciting ad dollars, people do this all the time to me. They say, well, I want Nike to advertise. I want Gatorade to advertise. I want Verizon to advertise. And those are the hardest companies to get to advertise. In our minds, we think, oh, these are massive brands. They have lots of ad dollars. I'll go to them. Surely if giving me $10,000 or $1,000 will be easy, because they have millions of dollars in ad spend. But the reality is that they're the hardest, because 9 times out of 10, they're working with a podcast to advertising agency, which, take it from me, is not super easy to get into an agency. Number 2, they have very stringent selection processes about who they're going to choose and why they're going to choose that particular advertiser. Podcaster, right? And it's going to take a really long time. Some of these big companies make their marketing plans a year in advance, right? And so you could call them today, maybe they would be interested, but they're not going to place ads with you for a year. So my recommendation, beyond looking at your industry, is trying to find those mid-level companies, right? So you don't really want a brand new startup company, because they probably don't have a ton of money unless they've raised funds. But if you could get a good middle of the road, just solid business that, could be a really good fit with the product that you or the audience that you have for their product, those people are going to be the easiest to sell, because they want to create a relationship with you.
We talk so often about the competition in media. So is it a great day to start a podcast? Yes, it is. But I want to start a YouTube channel. But there's millions of videos going up every day. That's a lot of competition. And podcasting doesn't get nearly as much advertising money as, let's say, Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and that sort of thing. And Tom Webster said I could, share the slide that I'm just about to pop up here on the screen here. And I think you've probably seen it. So let's take a second here for me to pull it up. So this is the one that sort of shows that podcasting and platform usage, podcasting is incredibly powerful. Yet we don't see all the lion's share of the ad money that comes in. So there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between, advertisers and where they're throwing their money and where they're placing it, versus podcasting, which clearly has a lot of people engaged with it, and it seems and feels that we're struggling to get to $2 billion in the industry. So what are we not telling people about podcasting?
The engagement rate in podcasting is extremely high. So if we were to take a look at this slide, we have all the social media, we have YouTube, and those are really short engagement periods, right? I should have these numbers memorized, but I mean, the average person is spending seconds consuming social media content and minutes consuming YouTube content, whereas the average podcast listener is listening to 80% of an episode. And if you figure the average episode is about 30 to 40 minutes in length, that means that people are spending, let's say on average, 20 minutes with your content, maybe 30 minutes with your content, which is head and shoulders above any of the other content types that are out there in terms of actual engagement. And I think that isn't something that we talk about enough, that relationship between the audience and the host and the engagement that we have there is so powerful.
Yeah, and Tom Webster said I could steal it, and I said, "Oh, Tom said I could steal this." Tom from Sounds Profitable, and I thought, okay, well, this is great. I'll just ask Heather about it, and she can explain it to me even better. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, no problem.
You have a lot of great tools on your website and stuff that a lot of people will come to me and ask for, such as, what does a sales proposal sheet look like? So if I'm going to write something up and send it to a possible advertiser, what should really be on that sheet that is really going to be of interest to them? Because I find that a lot of people make these sales proposal sheets and talk about themselves more than they're talking about what the advertiser will receive and the value of advertising on the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have created resources at truenativemedia.com for people in the industry. And I also have resources on heatherosgood.com. Actually, even have a full course if you're interested in learning how to sell ads for yourself, how to put together a media kit, all of those things. We have a toolkit available too. So there are a lot of resources out there. And I think that the advice I would give is when you are putting together material for an advertiser, think about being in their shoes and think about what's in it for them. As you said, yeah, they want to hear about you, but they're also really most interested in your audience, right? They want to know that who you are reaching in your podcast is the same target audience for the product that they're trying to sell. And so making that connection for them is really important. The other piece of advice that I would give is I think that sometimes newbies go over and above, right? It's like when you're reaching out, even on an initial email, keep it short and simple, right? I mean, people want to write these books and say, this is who I am, and this is my podcast, and this is why you should buy ads from me. And it's like, no, don't start there. Just ask, are they somebody that you could talk to about podcast advertising? Start with that, right? It needs to be short and sweet. And your sales materials should be short and sweet as well. Because if you make something that is too big, people aren't going to look at it. They're too busy. They don't have enough time to filter through it. And so, really think when you're putting this material together, how can you make it as simple and to the point as possible?
So you said something that triggered me in my mind there, and it was a part about over-serving as a newbie, right? You're new, we're getting together, we're going to over-serve you early, and then the client is going to become over-refreshed, and that's going to make the renewal very difficult, right? Because you're going to have to go above and beyond that. So this is something I used to think about a lot in radio when a salesperson would come to me and over-serve, and I said, I'm not here to try to say no now. I'm here to preserve the renewal for next year when we go back and do it. So take me past somebody who's going to be trying to make that initial first sale and that they need to know that they're in the game for the next sale after this. So what can they do to protect themselves against that, aside from over-serving?
Sure. Well, I think that one of the most important aspects of the sale is to understand the other person's expectations and what they're hoping to get out of the campaign. And I feel like that gets missed a lot in sales, period, is that we think we know what our customer wants. And so we give them what they want. We give them what we think they want instead of asking them what they want, right? So when you make a new connection, say, what would winning look like for you here? What would create a successful partnership? What would make you want to renew in the future? And so, it's not about, hey, we want to just sell you an ad. It's about how can we create a long-term partnership with someone? Because ideally, that's what we want to do, right? We want to get somebody who wants to advertise with us all year long for multiple years. I just interviewed a gentleman who works at an advertising agency, and he said, you know what? We have podcasts that we've been advertising on their shows for 4 years straight, right? If you ever listen to Todd from Blueberry Speak, he talks about how he's had a relationship with, I think, GoDaddy since the creation of time, right? It's been like 20 years.
I think it's 20 years now. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you want to know what winning looks like for your client, right? For your advertiser. And if you can start with that, that's the best place to start. But I do think, to your point, right? If you give somebody the sun, the moon, the stars, at the very beginning, where are you going to go from there? And so, there is that piece, but also it depends on how they're evaluating your show. And I would say one of the other benefits of selling on your own is you're less likely to be selling to a direct response advertiser. And getting back to kind of direct response advertisers, they're brands that when they advertise with you, they want to know that they're going to get X number of conversions, right? Like, I bought $500 worth of ads on Matt's show, and so I better get $700 back. And if I don't, then I'm not advertising on his show again. And so if you can find brands where they're like, the partnership is important to me, being able to get more name recognition is important to me, or being able to share maybe clips of your show with, other of my clients, or put it on my website, right? Like, think about strategic ways that you can work together and getting that. But I do think that there is a point to be made of meeting the client's expectations in the first round so that they want to renew with you.
So this will be the first time we're not going to have like a long-winded brand safety conversation, but because this is one that really comes from the podcaster side. And so we know that brands exercise brand safety before they make a commitment to jump on and advertise on a show. It seems fairly obvious. But is it really obvious to the podcaster? Do they have to look left and right over some of the past stuff and the past material that they've done in order to ensure that they're really ready to engage with a particular client? What should they maybe be looking for in past episodes that they might want to, take out or avoid or clean up, or whether it's content or swearing or something?
My opinion on brand safety is that a brand should know what they are getting into when they advertise on a podcast. So I'll give you an example. The other day, we were talking to a fairly well-known rapper who has a podcast and was looking for representation. If I were to say, hey, Matt, there's this rapper podcast. Do you want to advertise on it? My guess is that you would automatically create in your mind an idea of what advertising on a rapper's podcast would sound like, right? Is it brand safe? Depends on what your brand is, right? If you're a THC company, if you're an alcohol company, right? The list could go on and on and on, right? Like, there are definitely brands that would be really happy to partner with a rapper podcast because that's their audience. That's who they're trying to reach. And I like that example because it's pretty obvious, right? I think it's important that as hosts that we're not necessarily policing ourselves or policing our content in order to create content for advertisers. The reason an advertiser is going to succeed on your show is because you're making really interesting, engaging content. Believe it or not, or maybe it's easy to believe, but right-leaning, very political podcasts convert very well. And you can bet that when a gold company is advertising on a right-leaning political podcast, they know what they're getting and they want what they're getting. So I don't personally think that it's about cleaning up your show or trying to make it presentable so that it's brand safe. I think it's about making sure that you're aligning with companies that are interested in the type of content and the type of audience that you have.
Are you the podcast broker?
I am.
And this is where you can sell your podcast to a brand or somebody else? Is that how that?
Yeah, so I'll tell you about that. So I've been at True Native Media now for 9 years, podcast representation. And I have been a bit of an entrepreneur my entire life. So I don't know, probably 4 years into it, I had this bridal podcast that was literally the #1 bridal podcast at the time come to me and say, my husband and I are getting a divorce. The last thing on the planet I want is to do a bridal podcast. And I was like, I could see that. That sounds like, something you might not want to do. And she's like, so I'm going to stop doing it. And I said, what do you mean you're going to stop doing it? This show is making a ton of money. This is a business. You can't just walk away from the show. And she's like, well, yeah, but who do I sell it to? And I was like, that's a really good question. Who do you sell it to? So that happened once. It happened twice. It happened several times. And then pretty soon I was like, you know what, Heather? Because I talk to myself, like that a lot. I was like, we need to start the podcast broker. And what the podcast broker does is that we bring in podcasts that are interested in selling, and then we find companies that are interested in buying them. And I say companies, but we've sold to other individuals. So like recently we had a therapist who had started a podcast, and as you know, difficult to grow an audience. And he's like, hey, I would rather buy an established therapy show than spend the next 4 years growing an audience. And so he purchased it. We've had a lot of networks that are like, hey, we want to build our IP instead of starting, a whole bunch of new shows. Let's go out and buy them. And I think one of the interesting pieces of it is that some of the hosts have stayed, some of the hosts have left. But what I find a lot, and I'm really curious what your take is on this, but I find a lot that hosts are very tired of working by themselves. And if somebody were to say, hey, I'm going to give you X number of dollars to buy the rights to your IP, and I'm going to pay you, money every month to continue on as the host, and that's all you have to do, a lot of hosts are interested in that. It's all of the other stuff that goes along with producing a show that a lot of people don't want.
Yeah, so I might have 2 podcasts for you to take a look at.
Great.
Well, I've created one podcast. Of course, it's kind of like this is the book I haven't written, but it's the podcast I haven't created, and I've actually created it for really only 1 or 2 specific, brands that could possibly either. I did it so they could advertise on it, and I'm like, you know what? Somebody instead could just buy the whole thing and bankroll the whole thing, and it becomes a branded podcast under their wing.
Right. Yes.
So
yes, and actually, like that's something that we haven't done a lot of, but that I'm really interested in. So, like, if you have, we did have like a barbecue podcast that came to us, and we've been really trying to sell kind of within the podcast ecosphere. But I'm like, gosh, why don't we go to somebody like the Green Egg or these bigger barbecue companies? They might want to buy it. It could become their own branded podcast. And so, if there's something that's in that vein, I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, I think it's a thing. Have you done a number of those deals so far?
We have, yeah. It's cool. It's hard because no one's done it, right? So anytime you're like, there have been huge acquisitions, right? Like Wondery getting purchased or Gimlet getting purchased, or like these massive production, companies, but not like the one-off sales. And so it's something new. So it's harder because there's not a paved road ahead of us.
Well, do you want to deal with like 10 clients from the barbecue industry, or just the one brand that's going to buy the whole thing and bankroll it?
No, I know.
So this is a thing.
It's a thing. It's totally a thing.
Podcasting's a journey. And I understand that I gather you walked to Portugal, right? And you did the Camino Trail?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I had so much fun doing that. I really want to do it again too. So it's called the Camino de Santiago, and essentially it's a religious pilgrimage. You walk to the cathedral in Santiago, Spain, and there are several different routes through Europe that you can take. So the route we took was from Portugal to Spain, but now I'm looking at other routes because it was just so much fun.
Are you looking at the one from France?
Well, so the one from France is it's called the Frances Way, and it's the one that, Martin Sheen created The Way, which was a movie that kind of made the Camino more famous, and that's the primary route that most people take. But I'm really obsessed right now with the Del Norte, which does go also from France, but it goes essentially across the very top of Spain. So you start in Irún, Spain, and you walk all the way across along the coast, and then you dip down into Santiago. So, yeah.
I think there's also another route I saw just today that starts in Malaga and goes north.
Yeah. I heard on one of your episodes, are you going to Spain?
Yeah.
When are you going?
I go February 24th, and I'll be there till April 18th.
Oh, you will?
Yeah, but
that's
you know what?
exciting.
I'm not going to be walking that sort of distance. I'll walk to the tapas bar.
Yeah. That's so fun. What made you decide to go to Spain?
We go every year.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
And you speak Spanish?
I speak French, and then after about the third Vino Tinto, I'm fully Spanish.
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
totally
Oh.
bust into it.
I'm so jealous. In 2020, my husband and I were actually planning to move to Spain for a year. Like that was going to be our big adventure. And then COVID kind of spoiled it, and we decided to move to Florida instead. So
Actually, I'm looking at buying a place in Malaga. So
really? So
Yeah.
you really like it there?
yeah, I really do. It's a lot of it's just what happens if I spend half my year there, and can it be done?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's great. Love it.
yeah. The hard part, by the way, is just, working with people on the West Coast, right? Because it's like 12 hours away. And
Yes.
I'm glad you're in Florida. I can talk to you within the same day.
No, I know when we were planning it, I had a whole chart that I created. I was like, okay, how many hours can I do West Coast calls, and how many hours could I do East Coast? Because that I feel like is the hardest thing. It's like you're starting your day at the middle or end of your day, really. And I'm a morning person, so the idea of working until 9:00 at night doesn't excite me. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Heather, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it, for answering all of the podcast advertising questions again.
Thanks for having me on.
The Sound Off Podcast is written and hosted by Matt Kundle. Produced by Evan Serminski. Edited by Chloe Emo Lane. Social media by Aiden Glassy. Another great creation from the Sound Off Media Company. There's always more at soundoffpodcast.com.